by thanking the people who have helped make this work possible, especially our JEDI committee here in EEB for providing funding to book transportation, reimburse meals, and attend meetings about prison educational programming. The many organizers of prison education programs here at U of M, including the U of M Postdoc Association STEM program and PCAP, the administrators from the Michigan Department of Corrections, our wonderful team of organizers for the bio program here in EEB. Thank you guys so much. And all of the presenters and students who have participated in the program, and to the earliest supporters of my outreach experiences, who I will talk a little bit more about later. Now, I'd like to start with a definition today. What does science communication mean exactly? Well, according to the U of M Library Research Guides, it is the act and art of sharing the stories and knowledge of science to the general public. The definition is left intentionally broad as it is meant to cover SciComm forms as diverse as news articles, like this bizarre one from the New York Times I found about sexual aggression forcing female tortoises to walk off cliffs. Documentaries like My Beloved Planet Earth, and presentations, and many, many more. Now, I think many of us in this room would agree that science communication is important, but I feel like it's good to take a moment to ground ourselves in the why. I think this quote from a 2020 editorial piece in Metallography, Microstructure, and Analysis, of all places, sums it up quite nicely. The quote says, "Scientists communicate their science prolifically and the world consumes it rapidly. However, there seems to be a gap between the two parties, communicating science well so it is understood. This communication gap is easy to see in many current public debates involving the climate crisis, vaccination, transgender individuals' existence, among others. The public notion of uncertainty is much different than the many definitions of scientific uncertainty. It might seem like mere semantics to some, but these public scientific debates have real life and death consequences for people." So it seems to me that the overarching goal of science communication is to shrink this gap between scientists and the public by communicating science effectively to improve public knowledge, understanding, and trust in science. Now, I believe that science communication is important and necessary in all of its forms and to all audiences. But one major takeaway I'd like to leave you with today is that it can make a difference when we consider who the public or the general audience is that we are communicating our science to. For EEB, and I think across many scientific disciplines, the target audience for in-person science communication, outreach, and engagement is often skewed towards school-age children. And this is great. I say, get them while they're young. But research shows that this also often skews towards communities that are predominantly white, wealthy, and well-educated, whereas greater facilitation is required to increase access for lower income and communities of color. Now, if the goal of science communication is to shrink this gap between scientists and the public, we have to make sure information is being shared with the whole public, which requires greater facilitation or meeting folks where they are for underrepresented communities. That is, for some populations, we need to put in more effort to bring scientific knowledge to them. Okay, but what does greater facilitation look like? It can start with creating programs that are designed specifically to include target audiences from underrepresented communities. Ideally, these programs are hosted in more accessible locations, such as by bringing the science to the audience, and provided for free to remove financial barriers. It's also important to incorporate being with versus doing for models of outreach. And remember that we are also members of the public too. And it is easier to be with an audience by connecting via storytelling, humanization, and dialogue. For the rest of my talk, I'm going to share some of my experiences participating in and organizing science communication and outreach efforts in non-traditional venues and the impacts they've had on me, others in EEB, and one program participant. Now, my introduction to non-traditional science communication occurred while I was working as a lab manager at the University of Utah, where my advisor, Lissy Coley, told me about work in Nalini Nadkarni's lab, presenting research in prisons, jails, and juvenile detention centers, including the INSPIRE and STEMCAP programs. INSPIRE stands for the Initiative to Bring Science Programs to the Incarcerated in Utah, and that is not the only non-intuitive acronym that you will see today. I was very interested in participating in these programs because the only experience I had had with outreach was as an undergrad working with local middle schoolers on science fair projects. And while working with these middle schoolers was rewarding in its own right, I have always felt very strongly about social justice and using my privilege to advocate for others. And here was an opportunity to practice science and advocacy together. As a participant in these programs, I presented some of my undergraduate thesis research and lab tech work to people who were incarcerated at Draper State Prison, Salt Lake County Jail, and Decker Lake Youth Center in Utah. These experiences were incredibly formative for me as both a scientist and a person, and there were three major things that I took away from them. The first is that prison programming helps build empathy for incarcerated people, and that we are undertrained in how to communicate science across broad educational backgrounds. And lastly, that this kind of work is important and for me was incredibly rewarding, and I wanted to do more. So while I was at Utah, while I was working in INSPIRE and STEMCAP, I applied to another program that's spearheaded by Dr. Nadkarni at the University of Utah called the STEM Ambassadors Program. This is STEMAP, not to be confused with STEMCAP. This program was developed with funding from the NSF and was developed using the Impact Identity Framework by Reason and Storksiek in 2018. In which scientists integrate their research, personal interests, skills, and social connections to identify the societal impact they wish to have as a scientist and as a member of society. As I mentioned, I really valued and still value the integration of science communication and social advocacy. So I sought to find a focal group and design an engagement activity that merged these worlds. As an undergraduate, I minored in women's studies. And at the time of applying to this program, I was working in a lab that studied the evolution of plant chemical defense. So one of my first thoughts was that there is a striking parallel between the public perception of plants and women as defenseless. And I came up with an idea. Women, like plants, are not defenseless. So I designed an outreach activity where both of these truths could be demonstrated side by side. And side note that this amazing drawing is the result of my wonderful lab mate Rosie's work at the museum in their Micro Worlds Investigate lab. So in order to get this activity going, I started by reaching out to self-defense groups, but it turns out they don't care about plants. Just kidding. But they never responded. So I worked with the coordinators of the STEMAP program to pivot and learned about a really amazing program that was run by a local community garden where they provide job training to single mothers and women living in poverty and experiencing homelessness. So I reached out to them and they were interested in working together. The specific community garden that I worked with was Wasatch Community Gardens in Salt Lake City, Utah. I visited the garden and discussed via email and learned that their on-site director happened to be trained in Krav Maga and was excited to teach a self-defense class as part of this outreach. So together we planned an activity where we would emphasize the parallels of public perception of women and plants as weak or defenseless, pairing the self-defense demonstration with a presentation and discussion on plant defense using plants that are grown in the garden. And we were all set to go until what else happened but COVID. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to implement this engagement activity that I worked very hard to design. Regardless, I still learned a lot through this experience and believe it helped shape my ability to communicate science and build the confidence to spearhead my own initiatives for science engagement and outreach in ways that incorporate social advocacy for underrepresented groups. The main things I took away from this experience are the worst thing that someone can say is no. So you might as well ask as many people as possible, self-defense groups, whoever, if they want to work with you. Second is that drawing parallels between science and people can humanize research in a way that makes outreach more impactful. And the last and this is maybe a little more personal, but sometimes things happen outside of your control and they don't turn out as planned. And I do think this has been very helpful in working with prison systems as well, because a lot of things are outside of your control in that kind of work. Now, because of these very influential experiences in my post-bac, I came into graduate school determined to continue outreach in these non-traditional venues. Specifically, I wanted to start a program similar to the Inspire program in Dr. Ned Carney's lab working in prisons. So I reached out to a program I had heard about as a U of M undergrad called PCAP. If you haven't heard of PCAP, it is the Prison Creative Arts Project. It is a large program that was founded here in U of M in 1990 that works with many local community partners to provide arts workshops in Michigan prisons and treatment centers. They have an annual exhibition every year showcasing the artwork of hundreds of incarcerated artists from across the state of Michigan. I think it's coming up actually in like a month or two, so look out for that in your emails. So I reached out to one of their faculty directors, Nora Kronitsky, about working in prisons, and she gave me some leads to follow up on, including a prison science education program being run by the U of M Postdoctoral Association, as well as a contact for the education department in the Michigan Department of Corrections. For the Postdoc Association program, this program chose 15 to 20 students from applicants within the incarcerated population at Macomb Correctional Facility. They paired lectures with hands-on experiments across diverse fields of science, including physics, chemistry, engineering, and biology. And this was about a 1 semester long course, and at the end of it, participants would receive a certification, though this was not for credit. Organizers in this program recruited postdocs and less often graduate students like me to teach 1 or 2 classes per semester in their area of expertise. And they did lots of work getting approval for all of the materials brought in for experiments and activities. It's very, very difficult to get things inside of correctional facilities. And this program ran for several years, but unfortunately was just recently canceled. Although it was canceled for a good reason, because Wayne State University is now offering a science course with accreditation. So net positive. Now, I really enjoyed participating in the Postdoctoral Association program, but I was still interested in starting a separate initiative. So I went to the MDoc Education Director, Kyle Kaminsky, and discussed ideas that would potentially reach a larger audience of incarcerated students and provide I lost my place. Opportunities for presenting research from scientists from a wider range of career stages. And I wanted to be intentional about approaching engagement from the perspective of being with and not just doing for. So I wanted the program to be developed with the idea of mutual exchange of ideas and knowledge and humanization as an explicit goal. And fortunately, and I cannot stress enough how lucky this was, the Michigan Department of Corrections was interested in working with me on establishing a new program. So with the help of some absolutely amazing EBers, we began organizing the BIO program at Parnell Correctional Facility. Another wild, non-intuitive acronym that is bringing knowledge exchange inside and outside of correctional facilities. With this program, we have had 3 to 5 presenters give 15 to 20-minute talks at events 2 to 3 times per semester since the fall of 2023. Participants were students in either college or GED granting programs who were given the opportunity to attend the early morning seminars. And at each event, we had about 20 to 50 students who chose to attend, which is really exciting. And importantly, I want to note that we emphasized for the talks from the presenters that it was half about your journey in science and half about your actual research. And that is in part for making sure that we are humanizing scientists as well. Now, of course, I've been really proud to see the impact that this program has had, but since we have had so many presenters participate, I thought it would be fun to get some feedback about their experiences. So I sent out a survey last week and got several responses, which I will summarize for you all. Now, all presenters had done outreach in some capacity before, but as far as who their target audience was in previous experiences, it consisted mainly of the usual suspects, primarily K through 12 children, undergrads, retirees, people visiting university events, and then one person had previous experience working with incarcerated people before. The majority of presenters also said the experience changed their perceptions of incarcerated people after participating in the program. As for how perceptions of incarcerated people changed, there were a few common themes in the answers, including something that has always been striking to me as well in this kind of outreach, which is the quality and insight of questions from the student audience. How interested and engaged students were in the talks, particularly since there wouldn't necessarily be direct positive impacts for their future careers. And my personal favorite response, which mirrors my own takeaways from my experience in the Inspire program, which is that incarcerated students are just people like anyone else. So hooray for humanization and building empathy. And similar themes emerged when the presenters were asked to share their favorite part of participating in the bio program. Participants once again highlighted the quality of the questions asked by incarcerated students and also appreciated interacting with the incarcerated population and sharing research with people who had a different educational background. I agree that they were a very fun and funny audience. However, we cannot ignore the flip side of this coin, and that is the difficult and uncomfortable parts of doing work in prisons. When asked what their least favorite part of participating in the program was, there was also a common theme among the presenters. Multiple people dislike the security clearance process, and I think this last response summarizes it nicely. The least favorite part is the most important part. Going through security felt dehumanizing because prison is an incredibly dehumanizing institution. And people also didn't enjoy interacting with the prison system, and something that I feel similarly about, but that I agree is important, seeing people locked up. That is in part why it's important to do this type of work, is to humanize both scientists and the incarcerated audience. When asked if they would recommend this experience to a colleague, all presenters who responded to the survey said yes. Yay. And the vast majority said they would do it again if given the opportunity, although I think it's completely reasonable to not necessarily want to enter back into that system, given the discomfort and difficulties with working in prisons. Now, all of this feedback, and I hope we get more, if you're in this room and you've done it, please respond to my survey, has been really amazing to see and makes me really proud of the program. But it remains unclear whether we're achieving our goal of an exchange, a mutual exchange of knowledge between scientists and incarcerated populations. This is because, unfortunately, we lack some pretty crucial data from the incarcerated student perspective. We were told by prison officials that we could not provide any surveys for feedback from the students for reasons unknown. That's just kind of the way we just kind of have to do what they say in order to continue to do work in prisons. However, from my personal experience, and as I think is evident in some of the presenter feedback, students were very interested and engaged in the seminars and expressed lots of gratitude for the program. But because I don't want the story to be one-sided, I wanted to end with the perspective of one of the graduates from the U of M postdoc STEM program at Macomb to provide a sense of how impactful this type of work can be. That student is Josh Puckett, who until recently was serving a life sentence in Macomb Correctional Facility. He was released recently after the Michigan Supreme Court ruled to resentence life without parole sentencing for 18 to 20-year-olds. And he is now the founder and president of the Adolescent Redemptive and Restorative Program, an amazing, positive, contributing member to society. And here's what Josh had to say. When asked how he felt about science and scientists before taking the U of M postdoc course, Josh said, boring and stuffy. I didn't realize how much science is around us every day, and I thought I wouldn't have as much fun learning as I did. When asked how his perception of scientists changed after the course, he said that science is fun, not a scary topic, and scientists are not stuffy people who are boring. In fact, quite the opposite. When asked how his importance and the value he places on science in his everyday life has changed, Josh said, I am now a senior at Wayne State for global supply chain management, and even in business, science is in everything. My understanding of the fundamentals of science helped me when I started at Mike Ilitch School of Business. When asked how his confidence discussing scientific topics has changed, Josh said, before understanding the scientific process and how to research and develop a theory about scientific topics, I wouldn't speak on them because I felt they were out of my depth. When asked about his favorite and least favorite parts, his favorite was doing experiments. I would love to be able to do experiments in the future in the bio program. But again, there's a lot of red tape involved in that. And his least favorite is that they were not able to learn about technology because it's not allowed for prisoners to learn anything that involves the internet. And lastly, when he was asked if he had anything else to share, Josh said, "It was amazing and changed my understanding of science and gave me confidence to take on larger educational pursuits." Obviously, this is an N of 1, but I think this is still pretty encouraging feedback to continue doing work like this. And with that, I'd like to thank those who have supported this work once again, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions.
So I'm going to swap over slides while Abby's taking questions, but if anyone has any.
What's next for the program?
I didn't have to answer this, but the program is kind of stalled currently. The prison officials and administrators are very interested in expanding to additional departments and even additional facilities, which is very exciting for us. And something that is an ultimate goal of the program. But unfortunately, when I responded and said that I personally don't have the bandwidth to do all of that on top of doing my dissertation, radio silence sense. So we're hoping that, we can just get lucky again and get in there when they're a little less busy and get things rolling again, because we have a very good system that has worked many times successfully. So yeah. But we're also moving to potentially different venues as well. I have someone who works in a domestic violence shelter and doing some engagement programs with children who are living in those shelters, something that I've been looking at.
Do you know of, I think here in Ann Arbor or in Ypsilanti, there is a correctional facility for women. Have you reached out? Is probably, are there opportunities there probably?
Yeah, so it's actually probably the most engaged with of any facility in the state. And there's a lot of university programs here because it's so close to that do that. So we sort of I think there's not as many opportunities because there's already a lot going on there. And we sort of intentionally tried to cast a little bit of a wider net. So Parnell is in Jackson, actually, which is really only 40 minutes away. But we decided to go a little bit further out. And that's also who responded to our request.
What's your favorite part of doing the bio program?
Seeing how people's perceptions are changing in real time. I think it's one thing to tell presenters what it's like and how it feels, but I think that the drive back is always my favorite. Everyone talking about and debriefing and saying these questions were amazing, those guys are so cool. I just think that's really rewarding. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that would be fun. Not necessary. I don't know if I can do it. That's fine. That's fine. I'll wish it. Hi, everyone. A few weeks ago during recruitment weekend, I realized that there's a lot of new people that I haven't met. So I thought that, first of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Patricia Torres. I'm a fifth-year PhD student in Hernan Lopez Fernandez Lab. I study freshwater fishes. And before coming to the US, I was working in the Museum of Natural History of Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. And should I click? Oh, here it is. Okay, so my research deals with macroevolutionary dynamics of, macroevolutionary dynamics in a small group of fishes. Oh, yeah. Thank you. From the Caribbean. And even though that's not what I'm gonna talk today at all, I just wanted to highlight a little bit of my system, how cool they are. They are a perfect system for studying evolution, but also for studying studying the implications of evolutionary biology in the conservation and the management of these species. So very cool system, but today I'm gonna be talking about another topic that I'm very, very passionate about, which is natural history collections, especially how the colonial legacies in these natural history collections have shaped and influenced how we collect and how we access these collections and why this matters. So I think we all know here that natural history collections are the centerpiece of biological research, including myself. I'm pretty sure that a lot of yours research wouldn't be possible without natural history collections. And it's not just the collections, but also the public facing part of it that has become a fundamental part of outreach and education, right? And one thing that caught my attention a lot was this paper that I read in 2023, in which a group of researchers counted all the natural history specimens in the world, and they counted over 1 billion specimens. But 50% of all of these specimens are stored in just 10 institutions. And all of these institutions happen to be in countries in the Northern Hemisphere. And at least for me, I thought that that was probably a coincidence, but obviously it's not. And even more when we take into consideration that at least for terrestrial richness, most species are in the tropics, right? Which happen to be a lot of the time places that have been colonized in the past or colonizing one way or another still nowadays. And this is really paints a very contrasting pattern when we take into account this latitudinal diversity gradient. And this pattern became evident when Park et al. In 2023 made a study studying the geopolitical distribution of herbarium collections. And they found this inverse latitudinal diversity gradient where biodiversity naturally occurs versus where it is housed. And more of these collections are housed in the Northern Hemisphere. And this is not a coincidence. This is a systemic bias. And this is what we refer to when we talk about colonial legacies in natural history collections. It's the historical imbalances in power relations, the colonial systems that were put into place of conquest, extraction, violence, and epistemic dominance that are embedded in how these specimens were collected and how they were used, and still inform a lot how we still approach the collection and research using natural history collections. And one of the most striking patterns or features of the colonial legacies is what we know about slavery and what has been called the extracting economies. So during the 16th and 19th centuries, the European and colonial expansion is linked to the large-scale extraction of natural resources, but also of local knowledge and biological specimens from the colonies and from Africa to these big institutions in the global north. Actually, many researchers have pointed out that without slavery and without colonialism, the power that Northern Hemisphere institutions have nowadays would not be possible. So when I started learning about these things, I became really interested in it. And I was like thinking, what about the Caribbean? We know that the Caribbean for centuries has been considered this natural laboratory where people go and extract things and make papers out of them. And very important contributions in biogeography, in natural history have become from collections from the Caribbean, right? And me, myself, being from the Dominican Republic, I was really interested in it, and I tried to take a look into it a little bit. So I think also from the historical context, it's really interesting because the Caribbean became this, the birthplace of European colonialism in the Americas. So I think that puts a little bit more also relevance into knowing how the Caribbean biodiversity is represented throughout the world in collections in the world. So to do that, I went to GBIF. First of all, I compilated a list of endemic species of amphibians, reptiles, fishes, and birds for all the countries and islands in the Caribbean. And I went to GBIF and took all the data available for all the specimens of those species. And I tabulated where the species naturally occur and also where it is housed. Or where particular specimens of these species are housed. And I found over 130,000 records, 907 species were available in GBIF, and 85 institutions. And probably not a surprise, 80% of the endemic birds, fish, and herbs of the Caribbean are those specimens are in American institutions, and second, in Cuban and Dominican institutions. But to me, this also presents not just a gap between where our Caribbean biodiversity is housed, definitely not in our Caribbean institutions, but also represents an inherent bias, and is that this GBIF bias is inherently biased because a lot of institutions in the Caribbean do not have data available in these databases. They don't have the resources to even do it. They don't have the tradition of doing it. So just looking at this point of view, we see the imbalance between what is represented. Also, it very well could be that there is more actual representation of the Caribbean biodiversity in Caribbean institutions, but because we don't have that data available, well, it's hard to know, right? Also, another thing that caught my attention is that in every island, in every country in the Caribbean, is very isolationist in the sense that they just collect things of their own countries. And I think that calls to a gap between regional collaborations between countries in the Caribbean in order to allow for Caribbean biodiversity to be better represented in the region, in the regional collections. Also, another colonial legacy that a lot of people have been trying to give voice to is to the hidden hands or the hidden figures in natural history collections. We know about these hero collections of Alfred Russel Wallace, Charles Darwin, but a lot of the time we don't know all the enslaved people worked and indigenous people worked that was behind the collection of all these amazing material that we now have. So these hidden hands or hidden figures calls to the outreach of first recognizing the undervalue and under sometimes hidden history of how this material was collected and also the knowledge about them. And here I have a few examples. Probably a lot of people didn't know that the person that actually taught Charles Darwin, How to Preserve Birds and Preserve Animals in general, was enslaved man, a Black enslaved man from Guyana, John X. Monton. Also, another one is Graman Kwasi, which was a Suriname enslaved man that bought his liberty, his freedom. He was celebrated as a healer in the community. And he found this plant, which had later, a few decades later, came to be Quassia amara, which is it's a native plant of Suriname, which is used for digestive problems. And this plant was presented to Carl Linneo, and he described the species formally, even though Kwasi knew everything that is to know, that needs to be known about the species, and also their medical, the medical uses of the plant. So this is just like a few examples, and there's so many more of the hidden figures or hidden hands, the hidden knowledge that without it wouldn't have been possible for European collectors to go to those places to collect those materials. And at the end of the day, why this matters? We know that at least nowadays we don't have overt colonialism like 100 or 200 years ago, but still a lot of the things that we have learned and how we do things impact how we still do science and how we still approach the collecting of natural history specimens. So these collecting practices of the past affect how biodiversity is studied today. They influence who has access, who conducts the research, who leads the scientific investigations. And these disparities hinder the local capacity of researchers, of regional institutions to be able to track and respond to biodiversity-related challenges in our region. So, and this is particularly telling when we take into account that over 60% of all the papers using Caribbean animals or Caribbean assistance are papers published by foreign-based researchers only. And just like 20% of them also include Caribbean researchers. So it's not a tell-all, but it paints a reality that there's a lot of limitations and not enough capacity building in the region. So moving forward, I think there's definitely, we need to keep investigating how the geopolitical distributions of Caribbean specimens in the world has shaped over time. The Caribbean is a very complex socio-political area in the world. We speak different languages. We have different ways of thinking and living sometimes in many capacities, which makes things complicated in how we explore these relationships. But I think that it is worth it to open a dialogue in which we can discuss how we can be more equitable and inclusive in our practices in zoological specimen collecting and also in research. International researchers should establish long-term, equitable, and meaningful collaborations with local scientific community. And something that I keep telling myself is to center the Caribbean, or if you happen to be working in any other part of the world, centering that area of the world and centering your research to maybe particular challenges of that region is really important. And even though repatriation is something that is still not very talked about a lot in natural history specimens, it is happening. Very recently in Jamaica, the Hunterian Museum in Scotland repatriated one of the two specimens that they have of this extinct giant galley wasp in Jamaica. which creates a precedent for maybe one of the things that can be done. But I think that establishing long-term equitable relationships between researchers in the Caribbean and researchers in the global North, and also strengthen the collaborations between Caribbean institutions among ourselves will be a very good way of moving forward. So I put a list of reference in which there's a bunch of books and papers and blogs talking about different parts of the colonial legacies and natural history. I didn't want to go too much into it because I thought I was not going to have time, but now I knew that. Now I see that I have plenty of time. So yeah, happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Hello. Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Pat. That was great. Thank you. I'm curious about more about your thoughts about like moving forward and like the solution to this problem. Um, Obviously you brought up repatriation, right? And so that's like one thing. And then for future collections, right? Um, I can imagine a scenario in which, you know, researchers collect something for maybe their own local institution and they collect the same species. They make sure that they have a collection for the local one as well, right? How does that look for like rare species though, like super rare and endemic species? And yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, wow. To be honest, I hadn't had thought about like super rare species. Definitely your point of keeping material in the local collections is, for me, that's one of the things that I'm like, you have to leave specimens here. But something that I didn't say, but I hope is kind of like obvious, is that it's not just the collection of material, it's also the knowledge, right? And sometimes if the material can be, let's say, divided 50-50 for reasons like it's very limited, it's very rare, we definitely need this material, let's say in the United States, to do this type of analysis or something that would not be possible in the Caribbean, for example. I would say at least the results or the knowledge in some capacity have to be given back. Like, I don't know, the sequencing, the CT scans, things like that, right? We have the whole extended specimen concept now, right? Like, let's take use of that too and exploit that at our favor, both for American institutions and Caribbean institutions, and try to, at least that way, if the material cannot be like separated 50-50, at least like the knowledge in some way can be like, we are giving you back this or that. So that's what I would say.
Hi, thank you so much. This was a great talk. So, excuse me. My question is, in my experience sort of exploring this literature, I find there's a focus often when it comes to natural history museums on the question of what do we do next or moving forward. A lot of times the focus is on museums as educational spaces. So like, for instance, the Das and Lau paper that you reference, which is a great paper, most of the recommendations are for like natural history museum exhibits, as opposed to recommendations for people like many of us in the room who are researchers. And so I was curious if, from your exploration of the literature or your experience, if you have recommendations for how we as researchers who use museum specimens should best address or acknowledge this legacy in our own work. Thanks.
Oof, I think that collaborating with people working with the material that you're working with, for example, or similar, or from that area of the world, I think that's always going to be one of the things that moving forward will have the biggest impact. Also, as you said, acknowledging that and acknowledging in presentations, in our papers, the work of the local people, the locals. And at the end of the day, I think it's also a conversation that people need to have. For example, I feel that we probably should sit and talk those things, different groups of people, from different areas of the world, right? And maybe decide what would be best for us. Yeah, because at the end of the day, like, I cannot, I am not the single Caribbean person, right? But no, yeah, I recognize that we Caribbean researchers also have to make our part to ourselves, center in the Caribbean, and work together with the international researchers to establish like real collaborations, not just come here and collect and leave, but like real, let's do outreach. Let's go to schools and talk about this very cool system, this research that you're doing, right? So I think relating to the people is probably also going to have like the bigger impact in the long run, I think.
Thank you. Thank you for the amazing talk. I also think about the similar issues in relation to the East Asian countries where like all the type specimens are in the formal like collections of the Japanese Empire, and for like a former colony like Korea, it's really hard to get access to these specimens, and it's really hard to set up like collaboration with those countries. However, I also think about like for like practical reasons, it's really hard to actually do all those like good things for like international collaborations. For example, if you think of countries like Vietnam, even if you try to set up like collaborative like efforts, most of the times the high official in the Communist Party would get into the author list. However, the actual people who work with you in the field would never be acknowledged. And also for countries like Myanmar or like Laos, it's almost impossible to like apply for permits. The only way that you can do collection is go there and bribe the National Park Service, and then they will let you collect. So I think like the themes outlined here can not work very well in certain type of countries or like other type of like unstable political situations. So I'm just curious about your thoughts about like how we should actually do these practices in real life situations.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for your thoughts. I am 100% with you there. Obviously, I didn't want to get into the weeds of the complexities of working in the Caribbean, but you are totally right. Sometimes it is hard to like establish these like real collaborations because the systems are not put in place. So I know it's not easy, but we should try to demolish those systems and establish new ones as the best of your capacity. Sometimes you are not going to be able to do anything, but at least, you know, a little seed can always be planted, I feel like. And that's how I feel, particularly working in the Caribbean. I know sometimes you want to do things right, and sometimes it's not possible to do the things the right way. But at least like try and do the best as you can. yeah, we could have this conversation for hours and hours, and I think that would be really cool to actually have like an open dialogue about these things. But yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see.
Um, I think about some aspects of these things a lot, obviously because I'm also from the Caribbean. But I'm curious to hear from you. So, you know how like us, we're in a privileged position where we're people from the Caribbean, but we're also working from and learning from a U.S. institution. So that puts us in a very unique position. So I wonder, what do you think is our responsibility in these scenarios, and how should it differ from people that are not from the Caribbean but are researchers?
Yeah, yeah. Wow, that's such a good question. I, at least for myself, I feel very passionate about this, so I feel really responsible about the topic. But at the end of the day, I think it's also shouldn't be put into the hands of one or two people to change everything. Like, first of all, it's not gonna be possible. Second of all, it's probably not the most ethic thing to do, because it's like you as a person, but like there's so many other people and so many of the ideas that should be taken into account. But when I say center in the Caribbean, I try to express this type of responsibility for ourselves as Caribbean biologists, Caribbean researchers, to start putting in clear words what we demand from, let's say, collaborations with American or global North institutions, like saying out loud, I need specimens to be lived here. I need these talk about this particular topic. I need that the CT scan data is given back, and we also have like ownership on that. So it's kind of like know ourselves, our place, and kind of like demand that our collaborations are equitable, that we are not just kind of like the locals that just help in the field, but also like to be more than that. And I think that's also sometimes something that we have to ask, because a lot of the times, research is by itself complicated, and people going to these places to doing research, they could have the best intentions, and their work is super important and super valuable, but sometimes they are not going to have these things like in the first as a priority. But I think for us, it should be a priority. So yeah, that's what I think. Well, thank you, everyone.
Let's give one last round of applause.
Thank you.
My dongle over here. That was really great.